All right, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Fourth Veil. This is episode, I think, number 5, and today we're talking about uh, close encounters slash abductions kind of thing. With us always is Darin Laners.
Oh, Robert.
How you doing today, Darin?
Well, thank you.
Awesome. I'm doing good too. I know you and I have we've touched on this topic a few times before, and it's probably pertinent to at least mention that these kind of scenarios, these are abductions. Um, when J. Allen Hynek, a prominent UFO researcher that was, he's paid by the government to do his studies, who started off as a skeptic and later became perhaps a believer in something. Um, he classed these things, right? Close encounters of the first kind, second kind, third kind, and of
Yeah,
course they traverse up that ladder. But Hynek never really wanted to go further than the third kind because he really didn't want to be looped in with what he thought were dubious claims by some in the 60s and 70s in relation to being abducted. And
right.
as you guys may or may not know, uh, Hynek, being a scientist, had a really big reputation to protect. And so, with that, I mean, you don't just want to go out and believe everything willy nilly. So, of course, he limited himself, or he kind of distanced himself from some of those other close encounters, right? Fourth, five, six, and on and up and over.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think those were added like after him. Like they just kind of started to add on to the scale he had created. But
yeah, that's right. So, I guess a good place to start here is I don't know. Should we just talk about the hills pretty quick? Kind of give a
yeah,
base
I
there.
think I think they're the first most well documented case of this occurring.
Up on screen for everybody watching, maybe those listening, try to follow along. You can Google it. Um, we have Betty and Barney Hill. Now, Betty and Barney Hill were um some of the first folks to really come out as people who had perhaps been abducted. So the Hills happens in the early 60s. Is that correct, Aaron?
Uh, yes, I think it's 1963, if I remember correctly.
What's unique about their case, in from my point of view anyway, is it exhibits a lot of what we call classic behaviors. And what's classic about it is not only is that one of the first reported, kind of objectively reported UFO abductions, it's just hard to think that they would make up the story. They're in a car on a road, the UFO appears, they have missing time, they go through regression hypnosis. And of course, regression hypnosis has its issues, right? Like, it's been proven that you can lead a witness in
Right.
hypnosis. And so presumably this is not the case, but the audio tapes exist of this, and you can listen, and it doesn't really sound like you, um, it doesn't really sound that they're leading her on this at all. But what is interesting is uh, you have to remember that this is in the 60s. Why would they call attention to this? Nobody, A, wants to ridicule. B, this has not been widely reported before. So this is kind of new. And C, they're a biracial couple.
Right.
And in my opinion, like, just me thinking about it, they probably wouldn't want to invite more people into their business than they already get, right? And so why put a flashlight on them for even more things, and um, have like negative opinions about them being tossed around, which were. And so
Mhm.
that's my thinking is you have so much to lose by going public, um, or so much to endure by going public. Why would they make this up? What are your
Right.
thoughts, Darren?
Well, I agree with that. I think in listening to the audio tapes, especially the ones with Barney in particular, you can hear, I mean, the terror. I mean, I don't think that this was, I don't think that the panic, the terror, that you hear in both the tapes is something that is easily faked. And if it is, they both should have been actors because they'd be Academy Award winning actors. I think if I recall correctly, there was some physical evidence kind of left with the dress that Betty was wearing, like it was torn in certain places. And I think kind of the smoking gun to it, which leads credence to it, is that, so I recall Betty claimed she was shown a star map and kind of like some intergalactic trade routes.
Yeah, I remember
And
this.
and one of the stars that was on the map was not found until like the early 70s. So how would she have known about this star existing, prior to its discovery? It's just too coincidental for me. So, I think that it legit happened to them. And yeah, again, to your point, why would they want to bring any additional spotlight to them, given that time?
Yeah, totally agree. I think that again, as you pointed out, it's just an incredible story. It lays a foundation for what happens later and what later people report. And the Hills are not the first, but they were really some of the first people who came out and made it okay for people who this might have happened to previously to move forward and report something like this. Some of the other things that classic cases that really stand out, and I think we'll talk about these in more detail as we go forward. But there were a number of incidents that we all know about. Like if you follow any of this, right? Things like Communion with Whitley Strieber, Travis Walton, and some others. Some lesser known ones I thought that I would just toss out for folks to investigate on your own, which I found really fascinating actually, was in 1974, a year before the Travis Walton encounter, a guy named Carl Higdon's encounter. That this guy was pretty wild. So, in his estimation, what had happened was he was out hunting, shot at an elk or a moose or something, and then an alien, like out of the Matrix, hands him a pill, and he takes this pill, and the next thing he knows, he's like on a ship, and in this cube-shaped ship, lands on a planet that's all foggy, gets out and sees other humanoids there, and then he's like got this feeling like he's there to be tested or be part of a human zoo or something. And then he's returned to Earth because he felt that, quote, because he had had a vasectomy, he was like no good to the experiment. Now, I found that, mildly kind of funny, right? It sounds silly.
I'm happy that I'm abduction proof at this point. Then,
You heard it here first.
yes, right, exactly. Breaking news.
Breaking news. So that was an interesting one, and one that I honestly, if I'm being honest with everybody, which I am, I feel like this is just one of those kind of made up silly stories that somebody was looking for attention, and the hoopla of the moment. Um, Another one that was interesting to me was a woman named Betty. It's like Andierson or Anderson, but it's spelled a little wonky. So she recounts a couple tales over her tenuous career as a person who's been abducted and tells the stories over the years. In my opinion, in an attempt to stay relevant in the conversation. Um, does that mean I don't believe her? Yeah. But she talks about a time where she's taken underground into these ice vaults where she sees flash frozen people from different eras all kind of lined up. And
Mm,
she is supposed to be maybe one of these abductees. And then later she's kind of brought out. And um, then later on, as the years go by, decades go by, every 10 years or so, she goes under regression and then she remembers a new abduction experience. and they kind of get more vivid and interesting as time goes on. In fact, in one instance, she goes out and she's shown a this room full of these creatures that, I'm sorry, they look like gremlins, but instead of the ears, being out there, they're like the eyes are way out here. They look like a beaker plus eyes, from the
Gotcha.
Muppets. Like nothing you've ever seen before. And I thought that was pretty interesting because it seems a little fantastical. Um, the other element there, when I think about different types of aliens, right, I start thinking about uh, the reports that came through when the Roswell crash happened. There's apparently, general was communicated to telepathically when an alien said something like, "Many more are coming, different species." And so maybe they do look like that. I don't know, but I didn't buy her story very, very much. Again, she came out with stories like every 10 years or so, and continuing this idea of dubious claims, because I think it's important to lay those foundations for the the people out there that are like, well, what about all these, questionable claims of abduction? Like, yeah, let's talk about those too. Um, During the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s, there's a slew of reports of people who had been abducted who claimed all the time that the aliens gave some philosophical message about the misuse of nuclear technology and how we're destroying our planet. Now, that's interesting, and that might be true at the time, right? We were wrapped up in the Cold War and all of these things, but they called them space brothers, and these kind of benign or altruistic aliens at best, benign at worst, would come to Earth, abduct you, Joe Schmo, and give you some philosophical message about how we're ruining the planet. Now, if I was an alien, I think I would have the foresight to know to go to a world leader maybe and say, "Hey guys, cut it out." But this is obviously not the case here, right? These are weekly world news cases for me.
So
I,
I'll
yeah,
I'll kind of do a counterpoint to that. Um, I think that that kind of message happens enough, not just in these particular cases, but even a lot of newer, newish cases. Case in point, we were going to talk about this, but I'll just kind of broach it right now. The landing at the aerial school in Zimbabwe in '94, I think, where these bunch of school kids were basically out playing for recess. They see some craft come down. The craft kind of land outside of the where they're able to go on their school ground. There's not really a fence per se, I think, but they were told, don't go past this particular boundary. They see creatures that resemble grays. Some of the children say, some of these creatures were, no more than an arm's length from them, and that they basically imparted telepathic messages to them about technology and how technology would potentially end up hurting the earth, that we would if we continued on down our path with our exploitation of technology, which seems kind of ironic coming from a species that obviously has there's a drawing of one of the school children did. This case was investigated by John Mack, who was a Harvard psychologist who kind of later in his career got really involved with the abduction phenomenon. And he went there and interviewed those children. And you can, I think if you go to YouTube, you can kind of watch watch his interviews in that. I don't feel he was leading the kids at all. But they, basically kind of drew your classic gray alien and, a spaceship. And and this was seen by over, I think, 60 some children. And in fact, there's a documentary that just came out, I think, last year called The Phenomenon. Have you watched that yet, Robert?
I did. And at the end of the film, there's a reunion.
Yes. So they have a reunion of these some of these kids that were part of this experience, and they talk about it, and they still, vividly remember this. So it's and I want to say that there was a study done kind of about mass hysteria on schoolyards and that this particular case was basically ruled not to be mass hysteria, that they believe a real event happened there at this time. So, to your point, I think between that and between all the reports you get from military veterans who served at nuclear sites where they have these UFOs come in and basically deactivate nukes or activate them and then deactivate them, that they are, I think, very interested in nuclear technology. And if we recall, we dropped the bomb in 45, August of 45. And when was Arnold? 46?
Yeah, I think so.
So, was doing that a kind of a beacon, or, kind of one of those things that maybe if you're watching, maybe, let's just use us for an example. Say we send out a probe, all right, or one of the probes that we've sent out reaches a planet, and we discover there's this primitive form of life, okay, and they're not technologically advanced, but we're curious, as I'm sure whoever is visiting us would be curious as well, and we're watching them, and then all of a sudden they develop nuclear weapons. Isn't that going to kind of set a light bulb out for you, if you're a spacefaring community, that these people are now kind of an existential threat potentially to you?
I mean, maybe, right? It's like when in Star Trek they first Cochrane does the warp drive, right? And then the Vulcans are like, okay, we can talk to them now.
Yeah, they've they got warp technology, so we better intervene before they go exploring and meet somebody they don't want to meet. So, yeah, I mean, to that point, yes, some of the, I guess, UFO cults, we can call them, were dubious, but I think that seems to be, in a lot of encounters, this kind of message regarding taking care of the earth and the environment, and if we continue down the path that we're on, that potentially we're going to destroy the planet. So,
right, this is kind of the interesting angle they took in the remake of The Day the Earth Stood Still, when Keanu Reeves plays the alien, right? Have you seen the remake, Darin?
Yes, yeah, it's been quite a few years, but I have seen the remake.
I love that, right? My favorite part is when somebody says, why did you come to our planet? And he goes, your planet? Like, that's an interesting way to look at that. So I think there is something to that. I mean, obviously, we know the government reports exist on these shutdowns of nuclear sites because this is all Freedom of Information Act, and it's been widely reported. What I think is just kind of dubious, right? Is Joe Bob in the hills who gets gets probed or something. But then who knows, right? Like Men in Black, the movie was silly, but how much of that, he's like, when Kay holds up the Weekly World News as like legitimate source material.
Right. Yeah.
So that's an interesting concept to me. I know also while we're talking about ideas of what's fake and stuff, I think you had mentioned a guy named Billy Meyer.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about Billy Meyer?
So Billy Meyer was a Swiss photographer who claimed to have a series of encounters with aliens, I think starting in maybe the late 50s, early 60s, and just kind of continuing through his life, and took these beautiful photographs of these UFO craft. The only problem is that he was proved to be a hoaxer, that he basically made models of these things. His true believers obviously believe that that isn't the case, and there's still probably people that believe that Myers was telling the truth. But I believe the general opinion is that he was, hoaxing these photographs of these craft. And then I think if you want to Google just Billy Meyer, yeah, for example. So uh,
These are fantastic images. I mean, these look like something out of Batteries Not Included, the 1980s film, right?
right, there's if you like type or if you look for like Billy Meyer's beam ship, I think there's a pretty good example of where it looks to me like it's a model now.
Here you
Yeah.
go.
So this one there by the with the this one there and that one. I mean, come on. Like the future, the one that yeah that right there. Come on.
They're pretty, standard disc looking, imaginative type photographs. I mean, I can't.
Right.
eh, Cool, but I mean, it's just not true. I mean, the same is true. I think with um, another set of photographs that I thought were really cool when I was a kid, which later came out to be false. Also, was these Gulf
Yep.
breeze photos, the Polaroid pictures that were proven to be, faked. They're called Gulf breeze, GULFBREEZE,
Hmm.
and they produced these using a multitude of different effects. Um, and so people are out there. They are out there to make a quick buck. And to tell their story, even when sometimes these things aren't exactly uh, making them money. It's kind of getting
Right.
some sort of a reputation, or maybe they're going to get a spot on the speakers circuit, as it travels around the United States, as these things do. One of the one of the stories I did want to tell was about these four dudes. Um, this guy here in the striped shirt, the vertical stripes. His name is Jack Weiner. It says Weiner, and this story was really incredible. It's the largest group abduction story ever corroborated. Apparently, these fellas, the Jack was at a neurologist appointment, and this was, I guess, in the 70s, or yeah, I think it's the 70s. And he decides that he has this work accident, and it's causing him to have seizures, like epilepsy. So he starts seeing his neurologist, and at some point during his visits, he explains to the neurologist this thing that's happened to him, and he's having these weird nightmares. And the neurologist is like, "This sounds like classic UFO abduction," and it urges him to look into it. Now, think about the standard of today. I'm sure a neurologist is not going to suggest you go, look into UFOs. They're going to find something else to focus in on. But this is the 70s, and we had UFO fever and abduction fever in the 70s. Like, it was the hot ticket. And so he looks into it, and he goes to a UFO convention. I think it's like one of these abductee conventions where they had about 200 people there. And Jack starts talking to a reporter, and the reporter says, "Hey, tell me about what happened and where this all do you think started?" And then all of a sudden, Jack starts telling this story about when these four dudes go camping together. They're up in the Allagash River area, and they're canoeing when they sight a UFO, and it comes to them. And apparently, he starts telling the story. And that's when the reporter guy says, "Dude, you need to get together with your buddies and do some regressive hypnosis." So they do. and they all tell the same story under regression. And this is that this beam comes and takes them all up individually, and they are all up in the ship at some point, and each one is like sitting on a chair off to the side, like a doctor's office. And then, while one of them is on a table, lying there naked, getting poked, prodded, tested, whatever, things that are painful. And then, when they're all done, everybody is then somehow transported back to the shore, with the exception of just one of them who is left on the boat. And all of them kind of recount this tale of how they knew they were being put on the shore instead of the boat. And they all have the same memory of the one who is on the boat being positioned on the boat by two grays, one in the water, like waist deep, like positioning an oar across the guy's lap, and the other one placing his hands on his lap. And then telling them, you're not going to remember this. And they leave. And so this is the largest group encounter of an abduction story that exists. I urge people out there to check this story out. This is a fascinating tale. And if true, how bizarre. And in my mind, I'm almost thinking like, did they make a mistake? Why did they put some on the shore and then some on the, one on the boat? And to their recollection, after this happens, they kind of come out of it, but they all sort of avoid talking about it. And it puts a dark mood over the rest of the camping trip, as you could imagine. But maybe they don't want to talk about this at all, and they regress it. And apparently, all of them had been having nightmares and night terrors about this event for 10 plus years before they had this regression therapy to figure out what was going on. Pretty wild stuff. So I think this leads into some interesting areas, specifically one of the, I think, is a leeway going from like, hey, these are these ideas of dubious claims. Here's one that's really interesting. I would love to talk a little bit about one of my favorite cases, and that is the Travis Walton case. And the Travis Walton case is pretty fascinating. I learned about it for the first time. I think we were watching Sightings, in the 1990s.
Right.
And this story was really incredible. And they even made, I think it was an HBO original movie, or maybe it was just a box office movie. I can't remember if it actually came out.
Box office, Fire in the Sky.
That's what it was. Yeah. Fire in the Sky.
So I actually am old enough to remember kind of when this hit the news and Travis made the talk show circuit. I remember watching, I think it was him on Phil Donahue, for those of you old enough to remember who that guy is.
Phil Donahue.
Yes, Phil Donahue.
That's crazy. Okay.
And, hearing this tale for the first time and kind of showing, I believe, I seem to recall them having some illustrations that, like, I don't know if he illustrated or if he had an illustrator illustrate them, kind of things that he saw. But it's a pretty interesting tale. And corroborated by witnesses. There were how many other guys in the truck? Like 4 or 5 other guys with him, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's the end of the day. These guys are rolling home. They see a light, a fire in the sky.
They're loggers, right? They were loggers, I believe.
Yep, they're loggers. And so they're out in the forest, and these guys are rolling home, and this thing appears in the sky. Travis gets out, and apparently everybody's like, get back in the truck, you dumb idiot, and everything else, right? And he gets out to the ship. He looks up at it, and a blue-green beam of light hits him, blows him back, and the guys in the truck get so freaked out, they leave. They come back a couple hours later when they get their cojones back, and they find that his body is missing.
Right.
And now they report the body. They report this. They report what happened. Everybody thinks they're nuts. Uh, they are subjected to all kinds of questioning by the police because they feel like maybe there's a couple bad eggs in this logging crew. Maybe somebody murdered Travis. Until he shows up 5 days later,
Right.
and he recounts this tale, and he's messed up too. Like he's got some real PTSD. Um, what he remembers, like he initially doesn't remember much. Um, and what makes this credible is the fact that all of them took lie detector tests and passed about what they saw and what happened. And so I always love this story. I mean, obviously, I don't love what happened to the guy if it's true, right? I mean, that sucks.
Right.
But something that's often reported, like he reports that he was in a pod, that these little aliens surrounded him, and that maybe he kind of alludes to like the big eyes and stuff, or maybe not what they actually are. Those are suits, and their eyes are actually much smaller, and those big eye things are actually just like a biosuit that, it's like a big shield.
Right.
And so one of the things about his abduction, though, that is not widely reported in the original stuff that he talks about, is that he attempts to escape this ship,
Right.
and then he's caught up by not a small gray, but a tall, kind of normal, what he called perfect looking alien, perfect looking person, or anatomical human ish, comes up and helps him, but first leads him to another room to talk to some other aliens. And there's three other like humanoids there. And then at one point, he's shown a hangar where there's more ships inside that have like this checkerboard top to them, um, which I thought was fascinating because I hadn't read about that before. But
Yeah.
then again, like I said, he's led to this other room where these three other aliens are there, and he's there, and then he blacks out, and then I guess wakes up at a gas station bathroom, uh, where he wakes up and he tries to call home. He's got no clothes, all of this stuff. Nobody knows where he's been. And the regression, he starts remembering all this, and it's tragic. And there was some scrutiny about the case also because these guys were behind on their logging project,
Right.
and there was a clause in the contract that said if there was an act of God, they could extend the contract and not be in trouble. Now,
Mm.
Travis was known to be apparently a UFO scholar, interested in the topic, maybe not a scholar, right? But interested. And so the skeptic on the other side of this proposed that they concocted this whole story to, assist them in breaching their own contract, this logging contract that they weren't going to
Yeah.
finish on time.
And I want to say that one of the very first lie detector tests that Travis took, and you can corroborate this for me, RJ, that he failed it, I believe.
I don't know. Live fact checking in progress.
There we go.
Let's see.
And then I want to say that T retook it, and then he passed, and he's passed everyone since. But I thought that there was one of the very first ones that he took that he did fail, if memory serves me correctly.
It says in the days following Walton's UFO claim, the National Enquirer awarded Walton and his co-workers $5,000 prize for "quote unquote" best UFO case of the year after they passed polygraph tests administered by the Enquirer and the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization (APRO).
Mm.
Walton, his older brother, and his mother were described by the Navajo County, Arizona sheriff as longtime students of UFOs. Some ufologists believe Walton was abducted by aliens. Ufologist Jim Ledwith said, "For 5 days, the authorities thought he'd been murdered by his coworkers, and then he was returned. All of the coworkers were there who saw the spacecraft. They all took polygraphs, and they all passed, except for one, and that one was inconclusive."
Mm.
So
Maybe
other
that's what I'm
references,
thinking of.
yeah.
I
Well,
thought originally,
so here's
I
here's
thought
the bit.
originally it was the lie detector that they took for the Inquirer that he failed, and then he retook it and passed it, and he got the money. But
Yeah. So
um,
this is a bit too. The skeptics reception says skeptics consider the case to be a hoax, describing it as a sensationalizing on the part of the media and a put up job to make money. A UFO researcher, Philip J. Klass, considered Walton's story to be a hoax perpetrated for financial gain and discovered many discrepancies in the account of Walton and his coworkers. After investigating the case, Klass reported that the polygraph tests were poorly administered, that
maybe
Walton
that's
used
right.
polygraph countermeasures, such as holding his breath, and that Klass uncovered an earlier failed test administered by an examiner who concluded the case involved gross deception. So that is definitely, I think, where you're getting that bit of information
That's
from.
probably it.
But hey, I mean, I don't know. It sounds like an amazing story, um, but I think it's a fair one that's like kind of on the cusp. Which way do you go?
Right.
And even right now, there's a new documentary out about Travis Walton and his buddies. I think it's on Amazon Prime, but I haven't been able to watch it yet. How about you?
No, I've not watched it yet.
So if we go on from Travis Walton, as you kind of think about the abduction cases, um, it we move around like talking about just these sightings, but it's not necessarily just about abductions. It's encounters, and these encounters are anywhere from the sighting to I would say we're looking at encounters the way Alan Hynek put them, right within 500 feet
Right.
of something. And this is really interesting. One of the coolest photographs that appears in a book called Alien Encounters, which is a series of books Time Life put out, is this image here, which I will share. So this picture, and it's
There we
from
go.
Vancouver Island, and the picture was scrutinized by scientists and the like, and they really couldn't find uh, any deception here. And it's one of the clearer photographs where you actually see the whole disc. You kind of see some highlighting underneath and on top to show a dome, perhaps. Uh, but it was pretty fascinating to see this come out. This qualified to be, in this book on encounters. But how far do you, when we're talking about encounters, I'm wondering, uh, like, to what extent are these encounters happening? How old are these encounters happening? We've got all these myths, right? We talked about in previous episodes of cryptids, um, these age old myths of creatures and things. And if we look at encounters the same way, you can look at like Hindu tales and ancient folk tales and fairies. Even the tales of Jacob's Ladder are pretty interesting. These encounters with the Enochian angels, right? This gets into that ancient alien theory a little bit. What are your thoughts around that, Darren?
Oh yeah, I agree. You have, you basically have these tales and mythologies of various cultures around the world, where they talk about the gods coming from the skies. I think even some of the Native American cultures, call them star people. The star people came down and gave us knowledge. You have the Sumerian myths about the Anunnaki coming down and giving them knowledge. Even to be quite honest, the Book of Enoch. Enoch is taken, quote unquote, up to heaven and meets these angels, and basically is told that the names of these angels and kind of what each angel was responsible for teaching mankind about. There was one who taught women about makeup, as I recall, metallurgy, jewelry, just sort of these beings, if you will, that were imparting knowledge to humanity. The ancient tales, Indian tales about the Vimana, the flying machines that their gods piloted. So I think that as humans, we have a desire to try to define the undefinable. So I think that it's quite possible that some of these myths are true, and that these that they are basically telling some encounters with other extraterrestrial civilizations. Now, I as much as there's some of the ancient alien stuff that I'll agree with, I often though have a hard time um, with it, just because in my mind it's almost sometimes takes away from the ingenuity of humanity. That the thought that the aliens built the pyramids instead of us building the pyramids, and so on and so forth. It kind of makes me feel like we're not, that through evolution we didn't learn these skills, or but once again, who's to say? It's hard to say. What think about Let's think about this. Let's just say, for example, if there was a cataclysm today and humanity was pretty much all but wiped out, and there were only a few survivors, that the skills that those survivors know, or that knowledge that those survivors know, are going to be the knowledge that's going to be passed down through the generations, until writing's rediscovered, or these technologies that were lost were rediscovered. So yeah, I mean, it's a good possibility, I think, but like I said, I do have some skepticism, just based on the other side of I don't like how it takes away from human ingenuity.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on this ingenuity issue. And talking about these ancient myths, I'm left thinking about this hot topic that everybody loves to bring up, which is Zachariah Sitchin and his Anunnaki and the planet Nibiru and all of this. Now, of
Right.
course, there's this idea that Nibiru is a planet, and it really might be true that it's out there doing this huge elliptical orbit. His ability to translate a lot of the material that he has translated, I'll put in air quotes, right, it's been called into question in his ability
Mhm.
to do it in a way that he wasn't embellishing facts or kind of rewriting the context in which these stories are talked in. So Sitchin is I can't say he's amazing or whatever. I do think that it is an interesting interpretation, and the way he presents this stuff is this nefarious alien race comes and enslaves humanity for gold and to
Right.
put it into the atmosphere of their planet to save it and all of this stuff. And what's interesting here is we've got a nefarious group of people. We've got the Space Brothers, where the people they're like, hey, don't have nukes. And then we've got people who are just getting abducted, poked and prodded. Um, and I'm left wondering, uh, when you were talking about these aliens of the past, maybe these mythic encounters, uh, what does an alien have to lose by, it seems like they were awfully friendly in the past and we wrote about them like they were factual. And then what today? They're nefarious, and are the good guys just far away and these are the bad guys? Like, what is
That's
going
a
on?
that's a good question. So I think that what has probably changed is that there were a lot less people in the past, and they were more spread out. So you had these civilizations that were kind of situated around in certain areas, and so the Sumerians were in what now is Iraq. Um, the Egyptians, obviously, in Egypt. Um, you had, the Native American tribes in North America kind of spread out. The Incas in South America, Aztecs in Central America. so you kind of had these different, I guess, cultures that were not, the Indians were obviously in India, but there wasn't a lot of humanity hadn't spread out and diversified and basically, started to civilize the planet. So I think at that point, from a intervention standpoint, if you're wanting to try to advance the human species, you can do it almost, somewhat safely because you don't have, I guess, that kind of global community. But nowadays they've watched our history, they see how violent we are, especially, let's look at the last century. We had 2 world wars, narrowly probably avoided a third one, several times. So I think that from a maybe societal standpoint, it was much easier to come down in your craft back then and have the ancient people think, oh, you're gods, and get them to do your bidding, or impart this knowledge to them. Whereas nowadays, let's face it, short of these things landing on the various world governments' lawns, outside of Downing Street or the White House or the Kremlin, all simultaneously, people aren't going to believe it. Short of some mass landing or something to that effect, people are going to, it's CGI. People are skeptics for the most part nowadays, and
I just don't know how we can be skeptical anymore with the reports that are coming out.
There are still people. Neil deGrasse Tyson is still, on Twitter, arguing that these things aren't real, and there are people that are Mick West, is all constantly trying to debunk everything. So there are these people that are naturally skeptical, and
I just don't know how you can be skeptical, particularly about some of the naval reports that have been coming out. Whether it's the Nimitz or the Tic Tac or the one that was recently released, I think through TMZ of all places, a leaked thing of a ship or something going into the water. This is legit. It's comical, I think, to think that these are hoaxed, right? These are legit videos. We don't know what they are, and the report that was just released, the I don't know what you want to call it, like the abstract of the longer report was just released a few days ago, and this report basically says inconclusive. And then the response to this report is an official response from the government, and their response is based on what they read in the declassified version, which we won't get to see. And their response was like, this is interesting, we should fund this, it could be threat.
Yeah.
So, what does that tell us?
You're talking about the memo that the Undersecretary of Defense put out right after that report came out, basically saying that the pilots had 2 weeks to report these incidents, and that it was basically mandatory or compulsory that they start reporting these encounters. So, I agree. Especially with the Nimitz encounter, you have the radar data from the Princeton. You have, the corroborating data from the 2 pilots, and then you have the third pilot who went up after the fact and got the forward-looking infrared video of the object. So, you have multiple data points, and I think that's where, when you start to have multiple data points showing that these are physical objects, that's when you have to start taking it seriously. And it's funny you kind of mentioned the Tic Tac to get back to kind of the topic at hand. I want to talk about Lonnie Zamora a little bit. And he was a police officer in Socorro, New Mexico. And in 1964, he was apparently involved in a, incident where he was dispatched out to a potential car crash in Arroyo, out in the middle of the desert, and he came across basically a white craft which resembled a Tic Tac. With it did have some markings on the side, and there were two small beings that were outside of it that he described basically were either small adults or large children, and they looked to be kind of tinkering around outside the craft. They get back in the craft, they take off, and I want to say that the craft basically left behind physical evidence. There were like burn marks on the ground, and there were impressions where these landing gears were of this craft that Zamora saw, and it was investigated by Blue Book, and basically they listed it as unknown. They couldn't figure out. There was no debunking, I guess, in this particular case by Blue Book that this was an incident that did not happen. Now, there are some skeptics that think that he actually saw a lunar lander test that kind of deviated from White Sands missile range, or he was, victim of a hoax. But I think, given the physical evidence that was left behind, it's very difficult to, say that it wasn't something that he was hoaxed. I believe he saw something. Yeah, you can see kind of how it looks like, looks like a Tic Tac. It looks like basically a similar object to what Commander Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Dietrich, have come on record to say that they saw.
And you have to know that Zamora's testimony on this particular incident has not changed. He's maintained the same story for years.
Yeah.
The physical evidence at the site where it happened, they indicated that cells of plants in the area had evidence of kind of like extra swelling or something.
Right, mutation or something like that.
Yeah. And then the people in the craft or whatever. And so if you anybody out there listen, like watching, I don't know if this is a book or whatever, but yeah, the landing at Socorro, New Mexico, the Zamora Incident is what it's known as. And yeah, his wife went on record. It was recently, I was watching a show, and she's older, of course, and the interviews, even with just his wife, are incredible. She talks about how distraught he was. I mean, people get divorced all the time when, okay, hey, this thing happened. I was drunk on the job. I need you to lie about it. Like, that's going to destroy a marriage eventually.
Yeah.
But this story has maintained its, it's the way they've told it for many, many, many years.
Yeah, I think
they've been interviewed on multiple shows, and even when he didn't want to talk about it anymore, he would still say, yeah, and say a few words about it, and it's always the same story. And I think that's really compelling, particular in that case. I find it fascinating. And we've got all these people out there, they say, oh, if only this would happen to credible people. I mean, this is a grade A cop,
Right.
Nothing on his record, hardworking dude.
Didn't make any money off of it. I mean, it's not like he went on the UFO circuit or whatever. In fact, like you said, he basically wanted to kind of put the whole thing behind him, and became tired of talking about it, to the point where I believe he quit the police force and basically was managing a gas station when he passed away. So, I think that, these particular cases, and still, even with the case of, the Nimitz encounter, the encounters that our naval pilots have testified, these are experts in aviation. They are trained to identify enemy aircraft. And I don't think that they could, there were basically, in the Nimitz case, a total of 4 people that witnessed the Tic Tac UFO. You had the 2 pilots and then both of their backseaters, their weapons ordnance officers, or WISOs, I guess is what they're called. And then also, then the next plane as well, where they got the craft on the forward-looking infrared. So you've got multiple witnesses, multiple systems that are logging the encounter. So I don't know how much more credible you can get at that point.
Exactly. And so I don't really have a way to jump to this next one, which fair warning for everybody out there who's totally freaked out by the face of a gray alien. Here is, and this includes myself. As a kid, I owned this book. I ripped the cover off because it freaked me out to no end, and I still never read the book. So here is the cover of Communion by Whitley Strieber. He is an interesting individual. He's a kind of a horror thriller writer. And this story about his encounters with aliens, outsold anything else that he had ever written.
Yeah.
So um, the story itself, maybe Darin, can you give us a rundown? My knowledge of this particular case is almost non-existent. I know he was claimed to be abducted over a course of years, and actually like talked and communicated with these things, and that they made a movie of it starring Christopher Walken, which we'll show a clip here in just a moment. But
Yeah. So as you said, Whitley was a horror author. I think he had written some books called, if I recall correctly, The Hunger, like werewolf books or something like that. He had a cabin in, I want to say, upstate New York, that he went to over, I want to say it was Christmas holiday, maybe it was Thanksgiving, but he was up there on holiday and had basically these abduction encounters, and they kind of came out. He started having these very vivid nightmares. Went to see his psychiatrist. They suggested that he undergo the hypnotic regression, and then kind of that bore out this tale where he had these beings come visit him in his home, over the course of time. Not only that, there's, if I recall correctly, he talks about how he would see them kind of disguised poorly in public. It gets fantastic at some point, but Whitley basically, his tale was, I think, kind of a renaissance along with kind of the Bud Hopkins research that was taking place, and Bud Hopkins books that came out around the same time, like Intruders. That it kind of started this renaissance of abduction study, and I think that probably also led to, maybe directly or indirectly, the Harvard psychologist John Mack getting involved in studying abductions and kind of legitimizing it as a real phenomenon, that these people that were having these encounters were not making these encounters up, that something happens to them, and that these encounters all had similar characteristics that were, sometimes fantastic, about, aliens coming into their room, taking them out through solid walls and or up through the solid roof to these ships, and having these procedures done on them, and then being returned and not having any memory of it, but then having these nightmares or these I guess flashes of what occurred to them, and it being very unnerving. A lot of them suffering PTSD, and so I think that and it's been years since I read Communion, but if I seem to recall, it basically does kind of delve into Whitley's own personal abduction experience, and just kind of some of the conclusions that he drew from it, or what was communicated to him.
Yeah, I am aware just from doing some cursory research on the man that he was dissatisfied with the film version of it because there were too many like creative licenses taken with the work and too
Oh,
much ad libbing.
I can definitely see that in the film.
Let's take a look at this one piece of the film, and YouTube might censor this, they might not, and if they do, we'll just leave in the audio and we'll do a cutout. But so let's go ahead and share this with sound.
Excuse me, I'm lost. Can you help me? Do you know if this bus goes to the end of the line?
You know, I can't believe this. It's an ambush.
You people, you're in. I'm telling you, you're in for one big surprise. One very big surprise.
Yeah.
Wonderful Chris Walken. I mean, the guy steals
that
every
scene was a bit edited because I believe he said it was an effing ambush. But yeah, the film is. I found it very comedic, so I can understand why would have been upset by the portrayal, because it took what he wanted to be a very serious subject, and I think the film pretty much diminished it to the point where it is it's comedic to me. And Walken's acting in it is sublime. I just watching it for his reactions to the creatures is well worth, I think, the price of admission. There's I want to say the scene where he first kind of sees the gray kind of peeking out from like the corner of a room or from a cabinet in his room or something like that, and he's like doing a dance with it. I mean, it's just really sublime.
It's only Chris Walken could do, I imagine.
Absolutely, he was probably the perfect person to pull
I mean,
off
I watch interviews with Whitley Strieber, and I don't get the feeling nobody talks like Walken, and nobody's kind of that eccentric, perhaps, but
right.
It is interesting nonetheless. I mean, he's got one of the most interesting tales of what goes on with these aliens, and as I was reading. Just doing some, cursory research again on Strieber. It says that he's expressed this frustration that his experiences have been taken as alien contact, when he says he actually doesn't know what they were. And I think that's a pretty interesting statement that comes from him in regards to the phenomenon. I mean,
Yeah.
look, it's a gray alien that you're describing, but also many different types, I guess, right?
He describes, as I recall, he describes in the book Communion about, seeing the ship and being taken upon it on a ship. So, I mean, that's where I guess it would be considered a classic abduction encounter. He also uses a claim that one of his next door neighbors, because he's kind of isolated, but one of his next door neighbors witnessed a UFO on his property, not on his property, but on Whitney's property around the time that these abductions were happening, and didn't really come out and report it until after the fact. And it kind of corroborated that this phenomenon was occurring to him. So, yeah, I mean, I can understand why he may not want to paint himself into that corner. Some of his subsequent works have dealt with where he's had these abduction experiences and has met, some, I want to say, dead relatives on the ship. So it kind of gets very much more, I guess, metaphysical in some of the later works that he kind of expands upon, with his of his encounters with these things. So who's to say, what he's what he's experiencing? Potentially, it could be something completely different, or who knows? It's and until this would until unless this were to happen to me personally, and I have my own tale to tell, I wouldn't be able to count or discount anybody else's.
So I wanted to bring up. I think there's a few things that we need to cover before we close this episode out. One is that I wanted to make known there's this play that was put out in the 80s, and it's called 1,000 Airplanes on the Roof. And it's this interesting idea that was, and I'll read directly from the text where I read about this. The last paragraph of this says, a sound like that of 1,000 airplanes pounds in his head, thus the drama's title. Fragments of the abduction scene filter in and out of his consciousness, and he thinks he is going insane. He wants to tell someone, perhaps the woman he is out with on a first date, his nightmarish secret, but he fears being laughed at or taken for a lunatic. The audience shares in M, the character, his horror as tension-inspiring music plays and holographic projections of dreadful alien faces appear on stage behind him. Reviewers of the 1988 production, who generally praised it, saw it as a metaphor for loneliness and loss of control over one's destiny. For abduction victims, however, the drama would play like a documentary. And so this is a play that was put on in the 80s about a man named M, who was a victim, like an investment banker who was, top of the world, and then like goes through everything and loses everything because of an apparent, like a psychodrama that goes on because of this abduction tale. So I'm going to check into this play. I'm going to see if we can find a cool like YouTube video of it, or maybe some screen readers or something. I think it'd be kind of cool to check out. It sounds like it's a one-man deal. Aside from that, I wanted to also share this next couple things with you. First is this map from a book that I found that really shows from 1870 to 1960, UFO, these dark spots are really the center locations for the sightings. Now, I'm sure these are relative to population centers, but if you'll notice, like, this isn't so much Chicago, right? It's outside Chicago. We do see a lot in Los Angeles, Northern California. We see, some hot spots around in different areas. But I was curious, like, where does this still show relevant data? So, like, look at Illinois here, which, just underneath the Great Lakes, just a section, lower half Illinois, and looks like maybe into Kentucky a little bit, is this hotspot area. Concurrence of what they call seismic activity and UFO sightings. Ooh. Now check this out. So there's a website today where you can go that will show you UFO hotspot and reported activity. And that's what this is. This is at ARCGIS, .com. And this shows all the hotspots as of January 1st. And it kind of goes through a linear timeline. So if we hit pause, right, and we bring this all the way up to today, but it plays out date to date. You can kind of see where a lot of this happens, and you'll notice that there's some highlighted activity here between Illinois and Kentucky and down into Tennessee. But it's still not as prevalent as we see like in Los Angeles, Sacramento, all these populated areas, which I guess would go to reason, because there's just more people who live there. There's more people reporting there. what are your thoughts on this? I know you've seen lots of stuff in your hometown, and before I ask you about something else, I want to get your opinion on hot zones.
I think, yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting, especially that these populated areas with all the light pollution seem to have an abundance, yeah, of these encounters. Which, are they misidentification? Are they? But I think that, as you said, kind of the more people you have per capita, the greater chance you have of somebody reporting something. Whereas where I'm at, down here in East Central Illinois, our population density is much less than it is up in the Chicagoland area. So there would be less people reporting these things. And to be quite honest, the encounters that I've had or the things that I've seen, I've never reported. I never called MUFON on them, just because, I guess that I didn't feel they were noteworthy enough to report. I've never seen a physical craft per se. I've seen, I think, I kind of talked about, I take that back. When I did see a physical craft, I was very young, and, memory is something that can play tricks on you. So I kind of remember what I saw, but I can't say 100% that it was what I believe I saw, because, I was very young when I saw that. But the other encounters that I had were, just kind of lights in the sky. And I think that there probably is a greater propensity from a statistical standpoint of statistically more people in a higher densely populated area to report these things more, just because of the amount of people there. If you're going to do a graph of that, and you have maybe 100 people down here that were to see maybe something, what would that equate to population wise in the Chicagoland area? Would 1,000 people, 2,000 people need to see and report something? So I don't know. I guess I would have to see, how they break down their data. But I don't think, I think that these things are being seen all the time. I think that there's probably a large percentage of people like myself that don't just end up not reporting them, just because, short of me having some sort of evidence of it. It's just, an eyewitness report of somebody seeing some strange things in the sky, lights in the sky, and that's it.
Yeah, yeah. Now, before the show, you told me about an incident, and if you're comfortable still, I'd love to hear this, because I think this is really interesting
Yeah.
and wild and crazy. But I know you're not crazy, and
Well, it
I believe
depends who you talk to.
Don't ask Greg.
Um,
Don't ask Greg.
Yeah, well, exactly, or some other people. So I have this vivid memory, and I don't, like I told you, I don't know if it was a dream or if it actually happened. But I was at the house that I lived in until I was going into my junior year in college, when my parents moved from this house. So it was basically, I think I moved there when I was 2 years old. So I'd spent a majority of my life in this house in Bradley, Illinois. And I remember vividly this being awoken to this knocking on my bedroom door. And I used to sleep with, obviously my door shut and locked. And so I open up the door, and my dad's standing there. But my dad is like in what I could say is a robotic state. He's not himself. I could tell he's like kind of like a robot or zombie. Just he's not. It's like he's almost like not in control of himself. He's just kind of standing there, and I kind of groggily kind of be like, look at him, and he just says to me, duck-billed platypus. And I'm like, well, that's odd. And I turn around and I see a gray by my bed, and that's all I remember. And
That
I
is
don't know, like I told you, I said, I don't recall having any other nightmares about it. I don't recall, any nightmares about abduction. So if they did take me, and I don't remember, ignorance is bliss. So
It's just bizarre, right? I mean, like this idea of duckbill platypus.
right,
So instantly my mind went, and I'm not discounting you at all. My mind went to this, I don't know, it's like a comedic drama, I guess. It was a show called People of Earth that got canceled after 2 seasons, I think. And this reminded me like a scene from that, because it's bizarre and at the same time profound. Um, I kept thinking, what if he didn't say duckbill platypus? Maybe that's what you remember you heard, but what if he said something else?
possible. I don't know. The only thing, I thought for a very long time, well, what the heck does duckbill platypus have to do with, aliens? Are they evolved duckbill platypuses or something like that?
Right. Yeah. You don't know.
You don't know. But to your point, I think it may be, if there's like some sort of trigger word or something to put me into a trance or something, you see modern hypnotists do
Is
it.
this your Manchurian Candidate moment?
Right? Yeah. Is that my phrase to trigger me into a relaxed state so that they
Why don't you pass the time by playing some solitaire? I mean, why don't you pass the time by some duckbill platypus?
Yeah. Right. Who
Yeah.
knows? So it's like I said, I don't know. It seemed dreamlike, but it seemed real. So I don't know. It's one of those things I file over under. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe it happened. I can't.
I think the closest I've ever come to feeling like abducted, right, is I've had episodes of sleep paralysis.
Right. Yeah, I have too.
And I know from understanding what that is medically before it ever happened to me, what it was when it was happening to me, and it was still terrifying the first time. And then after that, I was like, ugh. I'm like, well,
Right.
I'll scream as loud as I can, and I'll try to wiggle so that my wife wakes me up and my body goes, oh, hey, release the chemical, release the hounds.
Right.
And I scream as loud as I can, and my wife hears,
yeah.
And I'm shaking as hard as I can, and it's just like my hand doing like this. And you feel like you're doing more. But I've never felt like the entity that people feel, the dark shadow figure sitting on top of them, or the figures on the wall, or the being surrounded by the grays with this. And so when people talk about an abduction experience and people say, well, it's probably just sleep paralysis. Well, here's the thing, man. I've had sleep paralysis. It's happened to me like a good handful of times, half a dozen times in my life. And every time it's happened to me, I can tell you it's because like I was dealing with anxiety, or I was scared to fall asleep, or I was overly tired and fell asleep, but I was like on that cusp and I fell asleep, but I couldn't move. I never saw like the succubus or the incubus, right? Like none of those things. And so when people talk about seeing those things, and somebody says it's just sleep paralysis, that's the first thing I go, well, like, were the things there, or was it just paralysis? Oh, it's just paralysis. Okay, probably sleep paralysis. Things were there? I don't know, man. I don't know. Like maybe. But I've never personally experienced a sleep paralysis with entity being present. That's as close as I've ever got.
I've had sleep paralysis and the same thing where I think I'm screaming loudly and I'm basically, not getting anything out.
It's a groan.
Yeah, pretty much. So
yeah,
I'm there with you. I don't particularly recall entities, but I do recall, being when I was younger, having this paranoia of things coming into my room or so like I said, I don't know. It could just have been normal child, monster under the bed paranoia, or
I think that's a great topic for another episode is to talk about uh like maybe the idea of childhood innocence and being receptive to things
oh, we
that
can
we
we can
lose over
totally
time.
talk about that, because there are things that I recall seeing, that my brother recalls seeing at our house, that I was talking about there in Bradley, that both of us corroborated later, and I had no idea he saw them, and I had no idea that he had no idea that I saw them when we were kids. But so yeah, we can talk about that. I think that is interesting. I think that your third eye, I think, is still kind of wide open when you're younger. You have that childlike innocence, and I think you're more receptive to seeing some things that potentially, as you become older and more rooted in this world, that that eye kind of closes, and you lose some of that perception, if you will.
Well, Darin, I think this is probably a pretty good place to wrap up. I want to ask you before we close out the show this week, based on the idea of encounters, current status with the disclosure that people want and the things that the U.S. government is going into. I just want to get your general thoughts and feelings about those kinds of things as they stand right now, because this is what we're going through. I think we were talking offline, and you called this a watershed moment. And
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about that.
So I think let me put it to you this way. I don't know that the government will ever get to a point where they are at the point where they disclose that they have definitive proof of extraterrestrial life visiting us. And it's I recently had seen a clip of the I don't know if it was a TV miniseries or I think it was TV miniseries that they made it based on Bud Hopkins' book Intruders, and in it, basically Richard Crenna plays basically the Bud Hopkins character, but they kind of make him into conglomeration. Bud Hopkins was a painter, and I want to say they make him into a psychiatrist. So I think they kind of make him in a collaboration of maybe Bud Hopkins and John Mack and into one character. But Richard Crenna is having this conversation with this government official, and the government official basically says, what do you want the president to tell the public? Do you want him to go on national TV and tell the American people that there are creatures from another planet visiting us, that we do not know their motivations, that they are abducting our citizens and we cannot stop those abductions, and basically they have technology that far exceeds ours, and if we were to get in conflict with them, we would most likely lose? So I think it's good that they're starting to take the UAP/UFO phenomenon seriously, and that they seem to be interested in funding study of it. Short of a mass landing on on the as I said, on the White House lawn and other government capitals, world leaders' lawns, and them all coming out and saying basically we're here. I think that's probably the only way disclosure is going to happen. We talked a little bit about this as well. Look what happened during the pandemic, when the pandemic first hit and people were going nuts, going and hoarding toilet paper. And can you imagine what, a disclosure would be like for a lot of people there? I think that so many worldviews would be thrown into chaos, that there's this fear by governments, and probably rightly so, that they can't tell the public this information, just because majority of people would probably freak out.
It's interesting that you say they would probably freak out. You've got a number of people out there today that don't seem to freak out, though, when we've pretty much got confirmation of some interesting things going on out there. But then again, who's paying attention? We are pretty self-absorbed in the Facebook world and social media, and
Right.
we're really only concerned with a lot of the things that affect us directly. And I think a lot of people out there probably read that headline and go, "Yeah, no shit." Next, scroll
Right.
on by, and it's like no BFD to a lot of people. But I think to a lot of people like you and me, we sit back and we're like just dumbfounded, like, wow, this is crazy cool. Like this is only in the X Files, except, let's hope it's not as nefarious as it seems to be on the show. To your point about this hypothetical disclosure, where they're here, they're taking people. There's no hope for a conflict and a win because whatever. As much as crazy as that sounds, there's this kind of at least moment, which is, well, at least they're only doing what they're doing,
Very
right?
true.
Like, if they really are, out there doing these things, and we're just,
Right.
the guinea pigs, then no, okay, they could do a whole lot worse. Are they benevolent overlords now? Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, you're exactly right. If they and this kind of leads to the well, if they were evil, or if they had evil intention, if they wanted to enslave us, I believe we would be enslaved by now. I think that you have the different theories about their races dying, and they're coming to extract genetic material from us to try to continue their race. That seems to be a prevalent theory among these people who have been abducted. You have women who've been abducted and say that they've been pregnated and then carried a baby for a few months, and then the baby basically is gone. This is a common theme with women that are abductees. So, is that nefarious? Is that evil? What I mean, from a standpoint of scientific inquiry, look what we do to lab rats or other creatures when we test on them. So
Yeah, right.
they just in this case we're unfortunately just the lab rats, and that's probably
what
what's
we
going
and
on.
what if it was ever like disclosed? We find out in the future that yeah, it was this alien race and they were checking us out or whatever, and they said something to us like, whatever, we tested you. Sorry, we didn't know you were like cognizant. Like the
Right.
same way we test on other things and we just assume, oh yeah, like this mouse doesn't have a
Right.
concept of tomorrow.
Right.
What if
I
they
mean,
do?
so you hear them basically, you hear these abductees say that that they are basically very, like, I won't say apologetic, but they'll say you're gonna, they try to be reassuring, but they're also very cold and calculated about what they're going to do, and they're going to do it and don't really care what type of pain they're putting you through, because they're going to wipe your mind and you're hopefully not going to remember it. So um is that gracious of them to wipe people's
Right.
mind? And I think that they maybe don't have a full concept of the power of our neural synapses and the power of our memory, and realize that a lot of these things are still kind of kept subconsciously, or they just don't care. They just think that they're doing that they're wiping memory, and if somebody remembers something, oh well, it
Yeah.
doesn't
It
even
feels to me like we have the foresight to say something like, I'm going to numb you
right.
so that you don't feel this. Not, I'm going to put you through excruciating pain, but don't worry, you won't remember it.
Right. I'm going to numb you after the fact, right?
Like,
Yeah.
bro, numb me now,
Yeah.
knock me out now. Like, what do you mean?
Right.
So yeah. Anyway, great conversation today. I hope everybody out there liked this, listened to this. I'll put some links in the show notes in the YouTube video. You can go check out some of the stuff that we talked about. And yeah, I think we're going to have some great conversations coming up. We can really dive into some additional points on some of these things, like childhood ability to see things, third eye stuff, and much, much more. I'd love, one of the things I didn't get to mention on the show, Darren, I wanted to talk about was the encounters post mortem. The nurses at Roswell who drew what these aliens looked like,
Yeah.
supposedly, things of this nature. But I will put links in the show notes to some of those articles that talk about those, as well as I'll link back to the play that I found also, Thousand Airplanes on the Roof. I think that is a pretty interesting piece of, I don't know, film, I don't know, play that's out there that might help us understand those people out there who have some PTSD going on from an abduction experience. If you've got an abduction experience or anything of the sort, hit us up in the YouTube chat. Let us know about it, and maybe we can talk about it in a future episode. Darren, anything you want to address on closing?
No, sir. Just a great conversation, as you said, and always enjoy our chats, RJ.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you next time when we go behind the fourth veil. Take care.
Bye-bye.